Welcome back to the Strong Money Podcast. I'm excited to dive into our Strong Wealth Bitcoin custody framework today with Jacob. We really spent a lot of time, walking out in the mountains and obviously, doing some prior research. You doing a lot more than me diving into the different options around self-custody, what those look like from a technical perspective, security, privacy, really from every perspective that you can imagine. And then we were able to put together 10 questions, a list of 10 questions that we believe if we have the right answers to, then we can help you come to a clear solution, I should say, as far as what your Bitcoin custody structure should look like. We'll go through all the options available. We'll go through all the considerations. But really what I think we're doing in this episode that you probably haven't heard before on other podcasts or anywhere else is we're really tying this to your overall financial plan and what your priorities are. I think there are a lot of other people out there that we like to call Bitcoin consultants, which are very knowledgeable, Bitcoin technical experts, I would say, in this aspect. They know privacy very well, but they are operating in a silo when they don't understand your full financial picture. And so we're really going to take, the deep, technical expertise of Bitcoin, put it together with your overall financial plan in this, and help you think through ultimately where you should end up as far as custody goes. And it could be a blend of the different options. I think a lot of people think it's, I just need to find one. Maybe it's collaborative multi-sig and that's good. That takes care of everything. Or, maybe single sig, whatever it is, don't realize or maybe see the opportunity in maybe using multiple different structures depending on the purpose of, different portions of your overall Bitcoin stack and maybe how much you have. So, are you excited to dive in today?
Heck yeah. I think the part you left out about walking in the mountains, though, is during most of that walk in the mountains, you were just huffing and puffing, and I was talking to you because you couldn't keep up with me. So if I remember correctly, which is most of our time in the mountains, but yes, I'm ready to jump in.
Wow. You're just gonna throw me under the bus like that, huh?
I figured we could start off, on the right note. So that was a good way to start off.
All right. Well, let's just go ahead and dive right in then. Again, like I said, we have 10 questions that we're going to go through, and we're going to talk about, if you were to answer different ways with these questions, here are the direction we would probably steer you when it comes to the Bitcoin custody solution that you decide on for your plan. So, I think we'll just start by one, we'll start with the first one as far as answering it. But first, I want to read through all 10 just to give people a clear view of what all the questions are. And then they can understand, from there, kind of where we're going, give them a roadmap, if you will. So first question is, how much Bitcoin do you own? Which that one's pretty straightforward as far as why that's first. We got to understand this. If you spent $500 on Coinbase and put it into Bitcoin, and it's something that isn't even a real, you don't understand it or whatever, it was just kind of fun money, whatever, then that the rest of the questions don't matter. But anyway, so how much Bitcoin do you own? Are you comfortable with self-custody or willing to learn what is necessary to become comfortable, which is important clarification. What about your spouse/heirs? I think is important to include in there. If you're super knowledgeable, but they're not, that could change the direction we go. 3, how technically competent are you with Bitcoin self-custody? I think that's different than comfortable. How comfortable are you or knowledgeable? And we'll get kind of into that, what we mean by that. 4, do you want anyone else to access or receive your Bitcoin if you were to become incapacitated or pass away? 5, what is your total net worth? 6, do you have a unique public figure risk, is what we like to call it, or any other unique personal risks? And we'll really dive into what we mean by that. 7, what natural disaster risks must you protect against? 8, how important is privacy, /anonymity to you? 9, do you regularly spend or transact with Bitcoin? And 10, are you willing to trust a third party to help you manage your Bitcoin? So obviously some hot topics in there for Bitcoiners. I will definitely get into the implications of, depending on how you answer, which direction we would likely steer you in to give you a good, clear idea of what may be best. Maybe even before we even jump into those questions, let's just start first with kind of what it means briefly to take self-custody, and maybe from a wallet, or you know what I'm saying, what you're actually doing by setting up a Bitcoin wallet, and what that wallet is doing for you, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'll tie that into kind of, okay, what are the options then? So what is self-custody, and what does it mean to take self-custody? And then broader than that, what are our self-custody options? Because then that'll help kind of educate, okay, as we're going through these questions, here's where we might consider it. So, in the very simplest form, self-custody is taking control of your private keys. That's really as simple as we can get. We are taking full control, I should say, of the private keys to our Bitcoin. And I'm sure a lot of the folks listening probably understand what a private key is, but if you don't, what we talk about when we talk about Bitcoin custody, or maybe a Bitcoin wallet is a better way to put this. There's really three primary components of it. One is those private keys. The second is the signing device, and the third is the wallet software. So what are these? Private keys, those are the 12 or 24 word list that when you're setting up your wallet, it says, hey, write this down, don't show anybody, don't let a camera see it, don't put it on your computer, whatever else. This 12 or 24 word list, what this is actually representative of is kind of what's known as your seed phrase. So what this really means is that, hey, as long as I have these 12 or 24 words, I am able to send my Bitcoin wherever I want to send it to. So that's the important component of why private keys, are really the crux of all this. If you own the private keys, if you control the private keys, you can send Bitcoin wherever you want to send it. Obviously, when we own our money, that's a very a function of owning our money that is, very important to understand. Because if somebody else owns our private keys, that means that they can also do whatever else with our Bitcoin. That's how you get into trouble sometimes. Like that's how we get in FTX. FTX, the exchange, they owned your private or controlled your private keys. So they were able to send Bitcoin and whatever other cryptos wherever they wanted. And all of a sudden they did some, fun trading strategies. Those fun trading strategies lost all the money. Now they don't have the Bitcoin or whatever other crypto asset to repay you, basically, or to credit back to you. So private keys, that's the first one. This is a 12 or 24 word list. Second thing, signing device. Normally we see this as like a hardware wallet. That's common nomenclature: the cold cards, the passports, the ledgers, the Trezors. This is normally a physical device, not always though, but the premise or the function of the signing device is to produce a signed transaction. So what it does is it takes these private keys, which private keys, I suppose we should, kind of use this analogy. Private keys is akin to the password on your email. So in order for you to be able to send an email, you need to know the password to your email account to go out and send it. Anybody that has your email address can send you an email, but only the person that has the email password can actually send it. That's what a private key is. A private key allows you to send the email. So in this case, the signing device, it basically takes that key and produces a signed transaction so that you can actually then go and send Bitcoin to wherever you want to send it to. So in this case, the email coordinator might act as the signing device. So email coordinator takes your password and then, okay, you log in. Okay, we can send the email to whoever we want. In this case, the signing device does that too. The third piece is the wallet software. The wallet software is basically what communicates this signed transaction. So the private keys are what prove that you own the Bitcoin and control the Bitcoin that you have. The signing device is what creates a signed transaction with those private keys. The wallet software is what's going to communicate that transaction to the Bitcoin network so it can actually be sent. The 0.5 Bitcoin is going from Jacob's address to Mitch's address. So again, private keys, signing device, wallet, software. Whenever we talk through any of these custody solutions, these three components are kind of mixed and matched, meaning that sometimes with these custody solutions, all three of these components are wrapped into one software, and it's just kind of obfuscated. So yes, your private key is there. Yes, there's a signing device, but it's a digital signing device, and the wallet software just wraps it into one. Other solutions, it's piecemealed. So your private keys are going to be maybe separate from your signing device, and your signing device is going to be separate from what you use to actually communicate that transaction to the network. So that's the fundamental components of any Bitcoin wallet. That's the fundamentals of owning Bitcoin in general, even outside of a wallet. And then to speak to, okay, how can we own Bitcoin? There's 5, 6 primary ways you can do it. So ETF, right? That's the most recent one. That's the one that's hot topic in the news. Super cool. Yeah, we can own Bitcoin through there. Bad part about that is you're basically relinquishing all control. So ETF, they have the private keys, they have the signing device, they have the wallet software, all is there. One option. Second option, a lot of people still use, is an exchange. River, Swan, Coinbase certainly is a well-known one. Okay, the exchange, they still hold your private keys. They still have, control over the private keys, but depending on their practices, most of these exchanges are really good. Yes, nothing funny is going on behind the scenes, but they still ultimately control your keys. So those are the two solutions where you are relinquishing control of your keys to somebody else. What you're getting in return for that is ease of use. So you relinquish your private keys, you have an easier user experience because you can go into your brokerage account and buy an ETF, or you can log into your exchange and buy Bitcoin. Then from there, we move into the other options, which are truly what we call self-custodial. So self-custody, again, that means you take control of your private keys. The options we have in there, broadly, it's single sig and multi-sig. So those are the two primary options we have. Under that umbrella, you have like a single sig with a passphrase, you have a collaborative multi-sig setup, or maybe you have a multi-institution multi-sig setup. So that kind of broadens those two options out into a couple more under them. But those are the options. Again, under those options, we can kind of have these three components mix and matched however, but that's kind of the options available for everybody. So when we're talking through this custody framework, that's really what we're considering is like, okay, is the ETF the option we need to choose? Is the exchange the option we need to choose? Do we need to run a pure multi-sig? Do we need to do a multi-sig with a passphrase? Should we do a pure collaborative or do we do a pure single sig or a single sig with a passphrase? Do we do a multi-sig pure? Do we do a collaborative custody multi-sig? Or do we do a multi-institution multi-sig? Those aren't even all the options, but those are broadly, when we talk through the framework, the options that we're going to consider with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we'll just preface this also with saying we encourage self-custody. Absolutely. Just because you're taking responsibility of your wealth, Bitcoin is really the only asset that allows you to do that, unless you want to hold gold in your closet maybe, or bury it in the backyard. But it's hard to get the gold first, and then it's a lot harder to transport it or protect it. You can listen to our other podcasts on what is money if you want to understand the issues with it. But Bitcoin is the first completely digital asset that now we can actually take ownership of and not rely on a counterparty to protect, which is what we're essentially doing with this self-custody like you just described. So yeah, let's just go ahead then and dive in. I just wanted to make sure that people understood that we do encourage this, but you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, whether that's talking with a professional who understands this, or doing your own research, whatever that looks like, because there's no you can't with when your debit card gets hacked or something, or somebody steals your credit card and they go spend money on it, you can reach out to the credit card company and get the transactions reversed, or be made whole. When it comes to Bitcoin, if you do it wrong, there's no reversing the transactions. So you just want to make sure it's set up right so that you have your privacy security in place, and you're able to verify that, okay, you still do own the Bitcoin, and you haven't run into any issues or sent it off into the ether somewhere. All right, cool. One thing I'll also mention, and I think it's important before we dive in, if you speak with someone who offers a product within these custody options, so collaborative custody, multi-institutional, whatever it is, if you go speak to them, they're likely going to steer you into their product. Why wouldn't they? They make money off of that. But and I'm not saying that's bad. It may actually truly be the best fit for you. We acknowledge that. However, with us, being fee only financial planners, working with our clients, we are agnostic to the solution. We're agnostic to the platform. And so it doesn't matter which direction we go, it's going to be the direction that's actually best for you. And we believe that that is an advantage in working with someone like us to figure this out rather than going to one of these custody, solution providers. Not to mention, we're also integrating this into your overall financial plan and how it affects those areas as well, which they will not be able to do. So I think that's important clarification to make up front here. All right, so let's just go ahead and dive in. How much Bitcoin do you own? And depending on the answer, how would that change things? Obviously, as we get deeper into the questions, there's almost like in the conversations that we have, we almost have to prioritize which question or which answer, which consideration is going to be number one, but this one is foundational. So when we're thinking about how much Bitcoin do you own, and depending on what the answer is, which direction we go, what do we typically say on that?
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, we say 1 Bitcoin is kind of a good delineator mark. So if you have below 1 Bitcoin, it's not maybe as important self custody, but it's still recommended. Once you get above 1 Bitcoin, then it's basically like, all right, we strongly recommend moving into some sort of self custody structure at that point. Obviously, as Bitcoin grows, the growth on Bitcoin is likely to outpace the growth of other assets, of what, inflation is, all these other things. So likely that's going to come down, right? Okay, hey, maybe it's, half a Bitcoin, maybe it's a quarter of a Bitcoin, whatever it's going to be. But right now, that's a good delineator mark. And again, it's not that, okay, you have to get to 1 Bitcoin before you can even consider self custody. You can have 500 sats and take self custody. Cool. Like that. That's awesome to do that. You get to learn what self custody is. But the basic premise is here is that, hey, that's a substantial amount of money. And, we talk about why that, might be a good thing to do at that place. I suppose it's good to talk about, why we would want to take self custody in the first place. I don't think we, really touched on that. We talked about the options and maybe what it is, but the why, briefly, hopefully, there's 3 components to it. Why you take self custody, or why you would want to in this case. First and foremost, before the 3, is just because you can. With Bitcoin, you already addressed that. You can take self custody. You really can't do that with anything else in size, at least. Gold, yes, you can, but I don't know anybody who wants to take, $5 million of gold into self custody. So, yeah, difference there.
Right.
But outside of that, 3 primary reasons. One is, again, when somebody else owns your private keys, they can do whatever they want with that. At the end of the day, like, I'm not saying legally or ethically, right? But I'm saying they can. Right. So they might not be legal, it might not be ethical, but they can. And that's how we get the FTXs. That's how we get the Mt. Goxes, the world. We touched on that. Secondly is the risk of rehypothecation. And so really, what rehypothecation is, very simply, is, and it doesn't happen just with Bitcoin, this is many assets, stocks, bonds, whatever else. Some sort of custodian, you deposit money with them. So you deposit Bitcoin, you deposit stock, whatever. They then take that deposit and then they loan money out against that deposit, additional money out against that. The reason that, it sucks really with Bitcoin, and why we don't want that to happen. And this only can happen under a custodial structure, because again, they own the private key, so they can kind of do what they want. The reason we don't is, in
Mhm.
effect, this inflates the 21 million hard cap. If you have what we call paper Bitcoin in this sense, so Bitcoin that is actually not tied to anything other than an IOU that a custodian is putting out, um, that you're basically working against yourself. One of the biggest benefits is the 21 million hard cap in Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of arguments of why rehypothecation is actually not, all that big of a worry for Bitcoin, but nonetheless, the risk is there. So,
Mhm.
those are the big reasons why we'd want to consider it. Because we can, because hey, somebody else can do something with your keys, and maybe the third one I was referencing is because somebody else owns your keys, controls your keys. They can also control how you spend your money. If somebody controls the keys, they can say no, you can't send Bitcoin where you want to send it to. And while this might not
Mhm.
be a big fear for many people in our Western sheltered culture, for many people around the world, this is actually a big fear, especially
Yeah.
in under regimes or governments that are pretty antagonistic towards its people. And so this is a really big benefit is, hey, we can take self-custody and nobody can tell us that we can't spend our Bitcoin. So to bring it back to the question, okay, hey, how
Mhm.
much Bitcoin do you own? The reason we say, this is even a question is the fundamental premise of, well, we probably want to self custody for some reasons. Where does it make sense to do that? One Bitcoin is a number where definitely strongly consider self custody. And above that, when you're below that, doesn't matter as much, but you can do it.
Yeah. I let's go to the higher end then and talk about our thoughts here. So, where would you say in your mind, and we haven't really set a specific level for this one because it does depend on some other factors that we'll get into. But I'm just curious to hear your answer. What level on the higher side then is it's like, maybe let's say someone has a single sig, just to use an example so we can kind of get tactical here. They've got their ledger, or well, let's just say ledger. They've got their ledger. It's a single sig setup, and they have X amount of Bitcoin. They feel pretty good about it. They're like, yeah, I've taken self custody. I understand what he's talking about so far, and they feel like they're taking maybe good practices. Let's say they also even have a steel plate backup
Mhm.
already. Um, at what level then? Maybe using Ledger is a bad example, but at what level of Bitcoin would you say it's like, okay, we need to start thinking about doing something else rather than what you're doing currently?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, Ledger was a bad example because it's like, if it's on a Ledger, get it off. Like, just do something else. So I mean, that actually might be good to
Yeah,
address. This is
maybe.
part of the
Yeah.
like the goodness, right? Is like, hey, if it's on a ledger, you probably need to consider a different hardware wallet. Ledger being a device that is not air gapped and is connected to the computer to move funds. I guess those are one and the same. It's not air gapped, so you have to connect it to the computer to add funds. And it's not a Bitcoin only wallet. Those three things really make it not all that great for large sums of Bitcoin, and even small sums of Bitcoin. So when we talk
Mhm.
about any sort of hardware wallet we're going to use, those are kind of the two or three big things we look for. We want it to be air gapped. So if you're air gapped, you don't have to plug it into a computer. And we want it to be Bitcoin only. Some people can argue that, hey, Bitcoin only actually provides more of a risk. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. To us, air gapped Bitcoin only. That reduces the attack surface
Mhm.
because then we're only worried about Bitcoin. And then it also, you're not connected to the internet. So you're completely what we would call cold storage in that case, or a cold wallet. And so that's hey, like that is something we want to move towards. So options available to do that right now. Two we really like are Cold Card, and the Foundation Passport. Both do this. They do it really well. We don't have to connect to the internet if we don't want to do it. But to answer your question, yeah, the multi-sig thing, and this does tie into more of our list down, further down. So it's like the caveats here get bigger and bigger. But multi-sig, to me, it really isn't that much further above the one Bitcoin. Like, you have 2 to 3 Bitcoin, okay, you probably should be considering a multi-sig at that point, a collaborative setup, whatever. It really does not have to get too much bigger from there before you should move to that. And I think you could even make an argument that you just would go right to that after one Bitcoin. That, that's kind of the piece here is it's like I don't necessarily think there has to be a delineation that it has to be, single sig to multi sig. And this is something too that
Sure.
are, certainly people, at least in the Twitter sphere, I think as a general idea, a lot of people have, and it's kind of like this idea that as your stack size grows, you have to kind of go through this linear path of custody, right? So it's like, all right, you want to start with an ETF, cool. You want to start on an exchange, cool. Do it with a small amount. Don't do it with a lot. With ETFs, that's kind of separate because you may have Ross, whatever. But so you want to do it on an exchange, whatever. Do it with a small amount and start there. Then once you have enough, move to a single sig. Then once you have more than that, move to maybe a single sig with passphrase. Then after that, maybe you move to a multi-sig. Then you realize the downsides of a pure multi-sig. So you want to do a collaborative custody multi-sig. Then, all right, you got enough. Then you need to go to a multi-institution multi-sig. And it's like this linear path of, okay,
Mhm.
once you get to these certain sizes, whether that's Bitcoin denominated or fiat denominated, that, okay, that means you got to go to this next solution. And that's just not the truth. That just isn't how it should be. Is it a general good path? Sure. Like, can people learn from that and say, oh yeah, like there's these solutions, and they get kind of more complex, maybe more secure, whatever. Um, but to have that be the be all end all is just not true. There's many more considerations besides stack size, which is why we have a 10 question
Mhm.
framework instead of a one question framework to get you where you need to go.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And yeah, I think that was a good point to bring up the ledger because, that was probably that and Trezor are probably the most popular, I would say, that people would use. And if they were just to Google, those might be the first that popped up as options. And when you don't know any better, you're just, that sounds good. So
And we should caveat
I'm
that too. It's
totally
not like we're saying that Ledger Trezor is bad per se. It's like a lot of times I talk to with clients, it's like a good, better, best thing. So there is bad things when you make financial decisions. Like, yes, uh, definitely don't take out credit card debt to buy Bitcoin when Bitcoin, well, ever likely, but especially when Bitcoin's at its high. Don't do that. That's bad. But with everything else, it's like a good, better, best. And the way I'd say that is like Ledger or Trezor is good, but there's better and best options, and that's what we're going to help you find out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Ledger's better than keeping it on Coinbase,
Yes.
as well. So yeah. So, okay, let's go ahead then and jump into question number 2, and then we can start to get more of these caveats answered with people. So, um, are you comfortable with self custody or willing to learn what is necessary to become comfortable? What about your spouse or your heirs? So we can even speak to, you know, maybe someone who is already self custodying, but maybe it's not, they don't have proper backups or whatever in place. And so we need to maybe think about considerations there. But why we're asking this one is we need to understand, do you even want to do this in the first place? You have to know what it means. We want you to know why we believe you should do it. So the risks that you're taking by not doing it. But let's be honest, there are risks by doing it. There's trade-offs to every single decision that you make. And so we just want to make sure you have a clear understanding of this. And then we can go, if you do not have, or you're not comfortable, don't have the knowledge, then we are willing to educate you. But if you're not willing to be educated, or willing to learn, well, then maybe we're definitely going to go in another direction than we would with somebody who is willing to learn. So I think that's pretty straightforward. If we have someone who's comfortable with it, like I understand it to some extent, maybe, and I'm willing to learn more. Okay, cool. Then we have basically free game from there as far as what the options are. We're of course considering the stack size already with that, but that doesn't limit our options. Where we are limited with options is when you're not comfortable and not willing to learn. Then we need to start to look at other things. We're probably going to look at keeping it on an exchange or even maybe go to the other extreme that we've mentioned and hinted at. If your stack size is big enough, the multi institutional, multi sig structure, where many people may not even know what this is, but I think it's good to also just share that. That's where you're not holding any keys. Some people you're holding one, but the point is there's really you no longer have unilateral control without getting someone else to also sign the transaction. So, there's a key held at usually two or three other institutions so that your risk is in theory spread out. Somebody can't break into your house and take all your Bitcoin, because you would then need to reach out to these one, two, three or other institutions and also get them to sign the transaction. And if you have a gun pointed to your head, they wouldn't allow that. And then, why we're saying we may go there if you're not willing to learn or not comfortable with it is because you could hold no keys in that setup. So you don't have to worry about keeping track of a key for that one. If you do hold one, most of the time, even if you lose it, well, there's still other keys held by these other institutions to where we could still move the Bitcoin even without your key in the first place. So you take a lot of the personal risk off the table, maybe is a good way to put it. I mean, you're still taking risk because you're trusting these institutions, but you do not have to secure the key. So, there's, again, trade-offs to every decision. What about then the next step of what about your heirs? How comfortable and willing are they to learn? How does that change things? Let's say, because what we typically see is the Bitcoiner is the guy and the wife loves the Bitcoiner, but she doesn't care about the Bitcoin. And so, if that's your situation in your mind, Jacob, how would your recommendation change if it's like, this, you love this, they don't know it, don't love it, don't care to learn? Where would you go then?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're talking, I thought there are two things I think would be important to point out kind of as we're still in the start of this is we kind of said single sig and
Mm-hmm.
multi-sig, but didn't necessarily say what's the difference. Very generally, single sig is you need one private key in order to move Bitcoin. Multi-sig is you need multiple private keys to move Bitcoin. So we're not going to go into the reasons why it's different, but a lot of times, like, when you're talking about the multi-institution, it's three different institutions have three different keys. You only need two of those keys to move Bitcoin wherever you want. So you only need to contact two of those institutions to move that Bitcoin wherever you want. Same if you're just running your own multi-sig. You have three keys, you only need two to move Bitcoin wherever you want. So that's one, just to like say, okay, there's the difference. There's reasons why
Mm-hmm.
multi-sig is good. We're not going to get into today. And then the second thing is, okay, you're talking about this, risk, a risk trade-off if you're going to use a multi-institution, multi-sig. Really what that gets to here is there's kind of three primary threat vectors when we talk about self-custody. That's human error, human ignorance, and human violence. So human error is you did something wrong, so you lose your private keys. Human ignorance is you did the right things, but because you don't remember what you did in the beginning, or your heirs don't remember what you did, or know about a private key or whatever, you lose your Bitcoin or they lose your Bitcoin. Human violence is straightforward. Someone breaks into your house and puts a gun to your head and say, "Hey, yep, give me your private keys because I'm taking your Bitcoin." So the premise behind the multi-institution multi-sig is it kind of removes really almost all three of those. The only one you might say is that there's still kind of a human violence aspect. Not so much that someone breaks into your house, they're probably likely not to get your Bitcoin, more that, okay, somehow those institutions collaborate to, okay, move your Bitcoin wherever you want. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's a likely, even remotely likely outcome from these things. I think multi-institution, multi-sig is very secure, but the risk is still there when you don't have your private keys. It's just like any other custody setup. So to directly answer your question,
Yeah.
we've got the wife that loves the Bitcoiner. Bitcoin is cool, funny internet money still. Where this gets to then
Mm-hmm.
is that, well, if we're going to run a self-custodial setup, then we need to have some way that your wife, your spouse, can still access that Bitcoin when you're gone when they don't know anything about Bitcoin. And so, this is honestly where our relationship becomes so valuable, is because we know you, we know your financial situation. No matter if you directly use us for collaborative custody and we hold a key, you run your own pure multi-sig or you run your own single sig, it doesn't matter. We know what's going on. We may or may not hold a key, but we can step in and say, okay, hey, wife, yep, this is a really awful, awful situation, but you're good because we know that John had his three keys here, or John had the keys here, or the backups are here, whatever it's going to be. We can step in and facilitate them being able to access that Bitcoin still, without ever having held those keys, and probably not even ever being on premise. We can just say, hey, here's the three keys, and then walk her through how to get that. But in the other token, if you're not in some sort of relationship like that, you don't have somebody that you can do that with. I mean, seriously, this is a huge consideration that I think many people, because Bitcoiners are for the most part younger, still a lot of married, some have kids, some don't, but they very much undervalue the risk of this. Because, okay, even if you're just running a single sig, well, yeah, my wife knows. She knows the steel plates here and whatever, and she'll be able to figure it out. I told her to go talk to this person. It's like, is that okay? Your Bitcoin right now, you're 3 Bitcoin. It's worth 200 and what's the price? $270,000 today. Maybe that's worth 2.7 million in however long. It's like, are you really gonna risk saying, "Hey, wife, here's the backup. Yeah, just go talk to Joe down the road, or my brother Ben, whatever, and they can handle it." Like, that is a horrible freaking plan, just plain and simple. And so, this is where it gets to, like, this is why these inheritance functions come up. But even I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but the inheritance functions, I think we'll probably talk about them a little more. They really don't solve this problem. Well, all they might do is, like, okay, help a little bit, but at the end of the day, like, your wife or whoever is still going to be blindsided by, okay, I have this Bitcoin. What does it even mean to have the Bitcoin? How do I access it? How do I use it? How do I do anything? She still might not know, even if they go through one of these inheritance protocols. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But like you're saying, yeah, if you have a single sig setup, or maybe, even worse, we would say, is if you have a pure multi-sig that's not a collaborative custody, you've added in more complexity, more technical competence necessary for your wife or your kids to be able to understand this, access, and actually benefit from the hard work that you've done to stack the Bitcoin that you have. So it's a serious consideration, even if it makes sense to you. Maybe you're concerned about the privacy, of having a collaborative custody setup, which we'll get into later, and our thoughts around that. But it's a serious consideration, like you're saying. And so we would typically encourage someone in that situation to seriously consider a collaborative custody setup. Or, I mean, if it was really extreme, maybe the multi-institutional setup, who knows? But we're going to essentially get away from your death being a single point of failure, with your Bitcoin stack. And again, the collaborative custody providers love to throw out that phrase, well, let's remove single points of failure by setting up, our custody structure. They're not the only option, is also important to mention here. We can do that, again, through having a financial planning relationship with us, to where we already know your full financial situation and we know Bitcoin, so that we can assist, your executor, or if you're, if you and your wife pass away, or if you just pass away and then your wife needs to get the Bitcoin, we can step in there, of course. So it's not the only option, is essentially, all that we're getting to, but it's a serious thought exercise that everyone needs to go through as soon as possible. As soon as possible. It's very important. This whole estate planning piece in general, what we find is it's easy to push it off because it's important, but it doesn't feel urgent. And that's only because we are overconfident in our ability to stay alive until tomorrow, when we actually have zero control over that.
And
So
not only that, but our lives are
it's
filled up with urgent and important tasks. So we have no place
yeah,
for the
urgent or
important
not
but non.
important. Yeah.
Yes. Or the vice versa, the not important but urgent, whatever, the whole matrix. I can't remember. We're just filled up too
Yeah.
much with the top left quadrant, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, so I think that one addresses it pretty well. Number three is how technically competent are you with Bitcoin self custody? Now, a lot of people listening will probably think about this and be like, why would you ask question number two and number three? So, what would you say? Why are we asking that question in addition to the second question?
Yeah, because if you're comfortable with self custody, it doesn't mean that you can implement every self custody structure out there. So what I mean by that is, okay, you get that, there's private keys, you get there's a seed phrase, you get maybe that you got a backup. That doesn't mean that you're ready to run your pure multi-sig setup on a Sparrow or under Sparrow wallet, I should say, because that takes a lot more involvement and understanding of the mechanisms behind the scenes to run that sort of setup. And certainly even other sort of single sig setups too. You could say the same thing, but this is where we get to the technical competency. First and foremost, is it doesn't mean you can run everyone. And secondly, the delineator here we're really trying to get to, and the technical competency, I see actually a lot. There's a lot of correlation. Someone's technically competent, they're probably more privacy focused. There is some times where someone's really privacy focused and not really technically competent, and vice versa. But a lot of times they go hand in hand. Um, and so there's reasons. Okay, if you're technically competent, what we get to is maybe that's a really good reason to run a pure multi-sig versus a collaborative multi-sig. If you're not technically competent, then let's run a nunchuck collaborative custody where all you need is a foundation passport, your mobile phone, and us as a third key. Like that's super stinking simple that even people who aren't technically competent, we can, we go through it with you, but we can set that up really, really stinking easily as well. And even, outside of these are all the kind of larger holdings we're talking about. You get outside of that, you can just say, well, if you have a smaller amount and you're, technically competent enough, then yeah, take it off the exchange and run a hot wallet. Like that thing can play in too. Like, okay, yeah, you get it, sure. Like run a hot wallet, back up your seed, and you're good to go. Like, but if you're not, that's a really good reason just to maybe keep it on the exchange too.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and it's I think it's important, that you just mentioned the privacy and technical kind of competence going hand in hand. What I want to point out is really, people will probably hear question two and three back to back and be like, why would you ask those two? But again, when we're factoring in all these other, seven questions, then that one becomes important, even though it might not seem important yet, in our conversations or just from what people are hearing. So let's jump to number four then. Do you want anyone else to access / receive your Bitcoin if you were to become incapacitated or pass away? I think we kind of did touch on that with about, are your heirs or your spouse comfortable and willing to learn about Bitcoin? But we can really take it a step further here. I think this would be a good place to even talk about inheritance protocols, maybe just even how they work, what that even means, but then maybe also speak to why that's not a complete solution in solving this problem.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, with that, when we talk about inheritance, right, that's a big word that's been thrown around, especially lately, and it's probably not going anywhere. Um, Inheritance is basically just trying to reassure people exactly this, that your spouse and heirs, if you want them to receive it, that they can. Even if you're incapacitated, right? So maybe not even receive it, just access it. That's kind of some of this inheritance can help with that. The problem with the
Mm-hmm.
inheritance structures as they sit is that they only actually facilitate one aspect of ownership of an asset. So, in pretty much every state except for Wyoming, to actually truly own an asset, there's two components. One is possession, one is legal title. So inheritance mechanisms, they play on this side. They play in the possession. That's all they can do. They cannot do anything with the legal title aspect of it. So when we have an inheritance protocol from all these providers, sure, they facilitate maybe a key going to somebody else, or a new key being generated, and then those funds sent to that wallet, and then off you go. But possession, whoever controls the key, again, that's only one aspect. Which, again, if you're in Wyoming, great. They have really good bearer asset laws, so that's all you need to basically prove full ownership of an asset. Everywhere else, we also need to consider the legal title aspect of it. So what that means is that, hey, we need to have some sort of legal structure that says, okay, this asset is owned by this person now, and then we want it to go to this person at some at some point for these reasons, mostly because you die. So the way this works is you can think about like your bank account or an investment account you have. You name a beneficiary on that account. If you die, that account goes to whoever your named beneficiary is, right? That is what's known as a contract. So a contract says, okay, this goes to this person at this point in time for whatever reason. Okay, there. That's what a beneficiary designation will say. Um, with Bitcoin by default, we don't have this, right? It's literally just, okay, we got keys and they go to whoever. It's like nothing about any sort of legal document or any sort of binding agreement that says it goes to this person. And so that's again where, when we talk about our strong wealth inheritance protocol, we do cover both sides of this. So we cover the possession. We'll help facilitate that through a collaborative custody if that's what you desire. We also, even if you don't want to do collaborative custody, say, okay, how do we make sure that title gets communicated? And most of the time, this is through a revocable trust, which we're not going to go into the details of that. But a revocable trust is a really powerful tool to be able to make sure your heirs can get your Bitcoin. And the final consideration here, which I'm sure will come up again in, when we talk a little more in the further questions, is the fact that with this title component, if you don't do anything with that, if we don't, do this kind of trust structure or maybe one of the other strategies that we have, what happens? How does legal title get then determined? Well, you get to go through the probate process. The probate process is a public court process. So the public estate plan or the public probate courts get to help you basically say, okay, here's the legal title and here's where it goes. So even if you just have a will, so you have a will that says, hey, I've got Bitcoin, my Bitcoin goes to my kids. Cool. That will is still going through the public probate process. Certainly, if you don't have a will, then it's most definitely going through the public probate process. And just because you said, well, possession is going here and this is my inheritance protocol, the court might not agree with that. And the court ultimately gets to decide where it goes if you have no will. That's called your die intestate. If you have a will and you die testate, they normally follow what your will says unless somebody can say that the will is invalid. Whole bunch of details here. The premise of what I'm trying to get to here is if we don't have a legal structure in place, like a revocable trust, your Bitcoin goes through a public process. So public, everybody can know and look at this, say, okay, this Bitcoin goes to this person. What have you now done? You've now effectively made your heirs a honeypot for bad actors. They go through the public probate records and see, oh, hey, here's the cases where Bitcoin is mentioned, and here's the beneficiaries of that estate. Well, I don't care how much Bitcoin it is, but if it's named in the estate somehow, I probably want to go check it out, especially if it's really appreciated. Great. What have you now done to your wife or to your kids, right? So this is why when we talk about the inheritance protocols, when we talk about in this case, we want someone to access your Bitcoin if you're incapacitated or die. We need to have both sides of the equation, unless you're in Wyoming. And even then, it's probably just good to have that other side just because there's actually other reasons
Yeah.
you want to trust anyways, even outside of the public probate process. But I think it's very important to know,
Yeah.
like, do you want your Bitcoin to go through public probate? Probably not. You probably don't want any of your assets to go through public probate, but especially your Bitcoin.
Right. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people will think about this from the target that you paint on your wife or your kids being a physical violence target. Well, there's also a litigation target. Let's be honest. Like, people love to sue people in our country. And so, like, you're also painting that on them of like, okay, well, I know they have this much Bitcoin. I know that's worth X amount. Well, I just got into a car accident with them. Whether that gets found out or not, who knows? The chances, again, are probably unlikely, but nobody wants, when you can easily set yourself up to even avoid it, then let's just avoid it. So good. That was good. So let's go on to what is your total net worth? And a lot of people will probably be like, well, you already asked how much Bitcoin I own. So why would you ask, total net worth? And I'll just speak to it initially, and then you can add any thoughts or clarify anything that I'm saying. Really, what we're asking here is we need to get a full picture of your total assets, because there's estate planning implications if you own a significant amount of assets. So right now there's a state tax exemption, a lifetime exemption, 27.2 million for married couples, 13.61 million for individuals, but that's set to get cut in half. Maybe Trump extends it, raises it, who knows. He's the one who initially, put that doubling, I would say, into place back in 2017 of this exemption. So maybe he will keep it going. But the point is we need to understand, one, are we going to need to be living off of this in the future, or is this could be truly generational wealth and that's it? If you have your Bitcoin stack this is for my kids and grandkids, I'm never going to touch this. Well, then we might look at, we may go to the multi-institutional if it's a significant amount and you're never going to touch it, because then you just don't have to worry about it. It's going to go to your kids, grandkids. Again, there's trade-offs with it that we can get into, privacy trade-offs, security trade-offs. But again, then you don't have to protect and hold on to these keys for 50 years when you don't plan to use them, or however long it is. It's going to be 20, a long time, basically, is the point. And so that just gives us an understanding of where you are. Also, if you are in these large net worth, you do have a large net worth, well, then we may consider moving Bitcoin out of your estate entirely. And we can do that primarily through irrevocable trust structures. So the trust that you're referencing earlier is really a revocable trust, revocable living trust, which would apply to pretty much everybody to avoid this probate process, like you said. So, we usually go that direction with people in their estate plan. When you start to get into high net worth, then we need to start considering these other trust structures that, basically you are no longer the owner and controller of the assets, but you have set you've set the rules basically around what happens to the money and when it happens. So you cannot benefit from them any longer. You're not the owner of, well, the point is
You're
we're
not
getting
the
them
owner
out of the
of the
estate, and then yeah, there's a lot. We'll get it. We're chuckling because there's a lot of considerations here, and it's hard to speak in absolutes without really going into the weeds, which is why we always prefer to get to know people's situation entirely before we start to talk about this stuff. But we want to just give you an idea and hopefully help you out. At least know you should be thinking about it if you're not already. But anyways, if we move Bitcoin out of the estate, then there's a lot of custody implications, which is where this fits back into our framework. So we won't go into those for now. That'll be good for future episodes, specifically talking about these situations and these types of trusts. Anything you want to add there or clarify? Yeah. Point is just if you have a high net worth, it changes what we think about when it comes to, one, estate planning, but two, custody. So 6, do you have a unique public figure risk? And then I just added in there, or any unique personal risks. Who knows? We may not even know what it is. And so it's just good to ask an open-ended question to hear if something comes to mind. But this public figure risk that we're speaking to, why did we feel it was important to include this one as a question?
Yeah. Yeah, I relate it to how we think about umbrella policies. And actually, what you already said, just kind of our society as a whole being so lawsuit friendly. Really, what this gets to is if you're some sort of public figure, certainly politicians first one to come to mind, but even business owner in the community, a pastor of a church, whatever it's going to be, someone that is known in the community by a large amount of people, especially if it's someone where it's known that, hey, you probably have some resources, like a business owner, for example. When you have those risks with an umbrella policy, which an umbrella insurance policy is just, hey, you get a whole bunch of liability insurance above and beyond what your home or your car currently carry. So when we think about that for an umbrella, we say, well, if you weren't a public figure and you needed $1 million of an umbrella insurance policy, but you are a public figure, maybe you need like 3 million now because you just have a broader risk spectrum than someone who doesn't have that unique public risk. So when we take that into the Bitcoin aspect, then what it really goes to is that, it honestly, it gets back to the human violence piece of it. It's like, well, you've got, and it's not always, right? Like we talk about the lawsuits, you could be sued, but you could say that's a form of human violence anyways, just not physical violence. Um, but what it gets to is that, okay, people are going to know you. And even if they don't know you on Bitcoin, but you do, like it just provides a broader attack vector, I suppose, than anything else. But certainly if they know you do
Mm.
own Bitcoin and you're a public figure, okay, that really changes how we think about custody and things. Because if you're that person and you're just running a pure single sig and maybe you got a backup somewhere else, I mean, man, that's freaking risky. I mean, someone breaks into your house because they know you own a lot of Bitcoin, and this happens. So this isn't just like a hypothetical we're trying to scare you. This literally happens, and is actually on the rise because of this exact thing. People know this, and people talk about it. Um, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
inherently risky. And so you could say, well, I'll do a multi-sig, setup, and that kind of avoids it. I'll geographically distribute my keys, and my house, one of my parents, one, whatever. It's like if you own enough Bitcoin, and those attackers are sophisticated enough, which most of the time they are, they ain't gonna care. You're gonna be like, all right, let's take a ride to mom and dad's then. Yeah, let's go there and get that other key that you need. Like it's not going to matter. And so really what it gets to is it really does get to back to this, okay, so there is risk to holding our keys too from this perspective. So do we actually need to think about mitigating that risk above and beyond, what we might do for the normal person or the everyday person? So it leads more to a
Mm-hmm.
custodial or quasi-custodial, i.e., multi-institutional setup in that sense. That, hey, it really does remove
Mm-hmm.
you from the key quorum in some form or fashion, and it's just a matter of what might fit better. But it certainly is something to consider, and that's kind of the public figure. We say other unique personal risk. Tie that back into what we were just talking about on the estate piece. Your Bitcoin goes through the public probate process. Now you got unique personal risk, right? Like, and I probably should clarify too. It's not like just like anybody can just walk in and like see all the public probate records just all willy nilly. Like, there's a process you got to request at the courthouse. Like, and I'm not saying they don't give it out. They do, but it's not just like you can go on Google and just be like, all right, hey, give me everything, right? Like, there's a little more work involved. So it's not just like out there for everybody to see on the internet type thing. Like, you got to be there, whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I actually did a
Mm-hmm.
lot of. I
Yeah.
don't even know if you knew this. I worked for a law firm when I was in college. I actually did a lot of the courthouse probate runs back and forth. But anyways, that's really what we're getting to is like public figure, personal risk. That
Yeah.
probably changes how we think about self custody. It doesn't mean that we can't do a pure self custody setup. It just means that we, at the very least, need to be aware of the additional risk we're taking if that's the route we're going, and that is your situation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason, I guess, maybe Michael Saylor doesn't, Coinbase holds his Bitcoin, we'll say. Um, say what you want about that, but this is maybe probably one of the very, likely reasons that he's doesn't have, however much Bitcoin they own is just a ungodly amount at this point, but he's not holding that in his house, anytime soon. Um, okay, so do you seven? What
Yeah.
natural disaster risks must you protect against? So this one really gets to, I think, backups. So why would we ask this question, and how does that change what we need to do with our custody setup.
Yep. Yeah. This one's definitely focused on the backup aspect of it. So, when we say we take self custody, just to keep it simple, you have a single sig, you got your 12 or 24 words. We want to back up those 12 or 24 words somewhere, right? Because it is something where, hey, if we lose those, we lose access to our Bitcoin. If we lose access to our Bitcoin, we lose our Bitcoin. So we want to make sure that we have those secured somewhere. So when we talk about the natural disaster risk, it's, well, if we just write those down on a piece of paper and throw them in a desk drawer, okay, what happens when your home catches on fire? What happens when your home floods? What happens when a tornado comes through, right? Like, uh, gone. All of them in that sense. Because if you're putting a piece of paper in there, your key, your signer device, your cold card, your passport's probably in your house too. So that's burnt. So that's done. So unless you have somewhere else that that 12 or 24 word list is at, you're screwed. Your Bitcoin's gone. So that's really where, yes, we need to be considerate of, most everywhere will have natural disaster risk, but even those that maybe it isn't likely, we still should properly prepare. And a lot of times what this gets down to is something that's talked about a lot in our space is the geographical distribution part, right? Because, pretty much, okay, if you just have a fire, sure, you could say, well, I have a safe, a fireproof safe, and in that fireproof safe, I have stamped in steel my, backup. Okay, good. So you've protected against the fire risk. And you could say, well, even say the flood risk. Well, the house floods, not a major flood, but just, minor from rainfall flood that, whatever washes it out. Okay, your papers, paper would be gone, but steel plate is still good. Your waterproof safe is still fine. But what happens when the tornado comes through, when the avalanche comes through, when the landslide comes through, when that actual big flood like we saw in North Carolina comes through? Like, it doesn't matter if it's on steel plate because your steel plate is going to be buried under 10 feet of dirt. So, whoever finds it, good for them because they probably actually get your Bitcoin then in however many years, like when it's worth $1 billion because USD has been inflated away to nothing. Um, like, that's what we get to with this because we need to identify them. Almost everybody has some, and most of the time it just means that we just need to be wary of the geographical distribution that we need to implement. And that can be really simple most of the time, right? It's just, where's a secondary spot that you can trust that a backup would be secure, can trust the person. And on top of that, if you don't have any place like that, then that probably means you need to do a multi-sig and have those keys in all different places. Because if it's just a single sig that's at the friend's house and you don't really fully trust the friend, okay, don't put a single sig backup in their house because you're going to be able to take your Bitcoin. Run a multi-sig, run a collaborative setup, and then they only get one piece of the pie or one piece of the puzzle. You need two pieces of the puzzle. They don't have it, so you're golden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, even outside of maybe that you're in a big flood zone or a North Carolina or Florida or somewhere where a hurricane could take your house miles away. It's still important for everyone to take these backup precautions. So make sure that you're doing that for sure, even outside of natural disasters. All right, so these next two of these next three will be big ones. How important is privacy slash anonymity to you? We have clients and people that we're in conversations with right now that are considering hiring us. That this is almost the end all be all, top priority when it comes to how they are going to custody their Bitcoin. So from that aspect, again, this gets back to what I said in the beginning of, we're going to ask all these questions to get an understanding of who you are, where you are, but we also probably have to prioritize these different things and understand what's most important to you. And then we'll go down from there, because if privacy is, the trump card, that's what I care about more than anything else, well, then we're probably going to be taking some risks in some of these other areas that we may not, want to take with someone else. But if it's that important to you, well, then, we'd recommend something else. So, yeah, will you just speak to then how, let's say somebody is privacy is number one to them, how that could change what we recommend?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, really what we're getting to here, and part of, why we have the framework instead of products. This is a big reason why. Um, because if you're worried about privacy, okay, you can run a single sig, you'll be fine. You can run a pure multi-sig, you'll be fine. You want to do any of the collaborative products, all of a sudden you forego privacy, because guess what? Whoever's holding that third key, us, whoever else it is, we now can see your Bitcoin. We can see how much you have. We can see what addresses it's held in. We can see your UTXOs. We can see where you're sending it, where you're spending it. We can see everything. So, okay, if that's something you don't want, whether it's us or otherwise, someone seeing that, then that setup probably isn't for you. And I think that's something that it certainly is talked about in these collaborative custody providers somewhat, but I don't think it's talked about as much as it should be, because it is a big
Mm,
risk. Like if they have access to that, even though it's view only, they can't do anything. They only have one key. They can't move your Bitcoin. That presents the risk, A, of them knowing, B, of someone else knowing that they know. And that is where the real risk comes in. Because if someone else knows that they know, okay, well, there's more than two, but there's two big things I worry about with that. One, if that someone else is the government, and an antagonistic government, which thankfully seems like U.S. is going the opposite way now, which is good. Hopefully that doesn't change course. But if you do, okay, so that government comes to that
mm,
collaborative custody provider and says, hey, give us all your client XPubs. I mean, what are they going to do? Refuse? Maybe. Like, okay, but how long can they even do that at the end of the day, right? Okay, so now the government's got that. You still don't have a 6102 situation, but they know that information. Furthermore, these companies, okay, they've got all this client information. What if a bad actor can somehow get into their systems, right? So, and again, I think we say all these caveats, say all this. I talk a lot about other people doing other things. I think for the most part, whether it's a custodian, a collaborative custody provider, or whatever, they are all great. I shouldn't say all. They are mostly great. I don't know every solution, but the solutions that are popular are great. They take security very seriously. It's not something that is likely, but it still is
mm.
a risk that needs to be talked about. And so, to bring that back, then where I'm going with this, someone gets access to their system. Now they can see all their client information. Again, that bad actor still can't move your Bitcoin, but they sure as heck know they can target you, and they're going to do that from the top down. Who has the biggest balance to the smallest, right? And that means that they're going to target you for more complex, phishing attacks.
Mhm.
It could be physical attacks. Who knows? But you are going to be targeted. And so, if privacy is concerned, collaborative custody, while it's not fully off the table, it's probably off the table, for lack of a better word. Multi institution is likely probably off the table. Certainly, custody solutions are off the table too. And so it's really these kind of more pure custody solutions that we would have to, consider for that. And before I go farther, I just one side note caveat with this. If you are worried about your privacy, but you also know that you bought all your Bitcoin on Coinbase and they KYC'd you, like, come and talk to us still. We can talk about how you might get that into a non KYC bucket. And the reason why you might, want to do that, um, is
Mm,
so there's a something known as a cipher. I always want to say cypherpunk manifesto. It's written by this guy in like 1993, Eric Hughes. And basically, just kind of talking about the cypherpunk mentality, but a lot of it is privacy oriented. And I think the first sentence of this is really helpful when thinking through this. If this is something you're like curious about, but you don't know, like, hey, where does this fit? So he says, privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. So I think that's a very important caveat when we talk through this privacy aspect. Is it's you retaining the
mm,
ability to selectively reveal yourself to the world and not having just everybody see everything that you're doing, right? Like, Most people don't want a person looking in their window all day long and seeing what their life is like, right? But for some reason, we just allow that to happen online, mostly because we don't have a huge say in it, but because it's pretty well accepted. Okay, well, I don't have anything to hide. It's not that you have anything to hide. It's just that you want your privacy. You have privacy by default as a person. Like that is a
Mm-hmm.
fundamental right that you have, and that I would say that's even a natural right that you have, the right to privacy, whether it's under the Constitution or not. Um, so digressing from that, that's why we might want to consider privacy. And then again, if it is something that's very important, the collaborative solutions likely not. The semi, custodial or the full custodial probably not. So it's a single or multi-sig then. And this is again where our relationship specifically above and beyond every other Bitcoin consultant can be so helpful. And this would go for any other financial planner that gets Bitcoin at the level we do. Is that okay? So you want to run your own multi-sig? Great. We can still help you structure it. We're not going to hold a key. We're not going to know any information about it. We might know that you used, Sparrow and that you used a cold card and whatever other wallets, but we're not going to know your XPubs. We're
Mm-hmm.
not going to know your UTXOs. We're not going to know your addresses. But what we do know is if you die, we can help your beneficiaries access that Bitcoin that you put together in that multi-sig setup. So that is the benefit of working with someone like us is that, okay, you want that privacy solution? Great. You've got it. And you've got the inheritance aspect too that they like to talk about with all these collaborative custodies because we act as that inheritance aspect. So, this is something that is just personally is really important to me. And I mean, Mitch to some extent, but certainly to me, like this is part of the beauty of Bitcoin to me is the privacy aspect. And so it is something we take extremely, extremely
Mm-hmm.
seriously. And this is the disappointing part about where I've seen Bitcoin going in the time that I've done is this push towards custodial solutions, certainly this push towards collaborative custody. It's like, is
Mm-hmm.
it good for a lot of people? Yes, because it helps people secure Bitcoin better than what they could have done before. But it's just like, man, like where does that slippery slope start to slope a little bit steeper, right? Where does it really start to roll? And it's a consideration that I think more people should take more seriously than what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I'll just leave it there. We'll just put an exclamation point on that, and we'll go ahead and move to the next one. Do you regularly spend or transact with Bitcoin? Really, I'll just touch on this quickly because I think the last one will really, be a big one too. The trusting third parties. Um, so spending or transacting with your Bitcoin is that's something that you do regularly or you want to do regularly, then you may have a small portion of your stack in, software wallet to where you could go ahead and send it to, whoever, whenever, maybe, pay a lightning invoice or something, buy some coffee, who knows. But, this is where we start to get into maybe a layered approach and where we can introduce this idea. We haven't quite touched on it, maybe just a little bit at the beginning, but we can take a layered approach to this custody structure. So maybe you do have, I know you like to use the analogy of this is your checking account, you have a savings account, and then you maybe have a long term, wealth building portion of your assets as well. We can take a structured custody or a layered custody structure approach to where we have a small portion of your Bitcoin available, easily, spendable, ready to go. It's by far less secure, but it's available for you to do that. And then we have, maybe some in, single sig cold storage, and then we go further maybe with the generational wealth. It depends, of course, but that's just why we include that there, so that we can understand, what you're looking to do with your Bitcoin on a more regular basis, rather than I just want it to be secure and I'm not going to touch it for 20 years. Um, so yeah, moving on to 10, unless there's something you really want to jump in there on, are you willing to trust a third party to help you manage your Bitcoin? Um, and we've touched on this many times really already. Whenever you are bringing in, counterparties, you are trusting them to do what they say they are going to do. You're trusting them to keep it secure. You're trusting them to not act, maliciously towards you. You're trusting them to continue to be in business in the future. You're trusting them in a lot of ways. To go back to what you were talking about with the collaborative custody setup, and I think it's a fun thing to think about, just because the analogy I'll use. But if let's say you're in a 2 of 3 multi-sig collaborative setup here, and you've trusted a third party to hold that third key and be the backup for you. Okay, you lose one of your keys. Now you have one, and the institution you're trusting has one, and you want to go move that Bitcoin. Well, they're supposed to be there and allow you to do that. But who knows? Who knows what happens, because you need 2 of the 3 keys to sign that transaction. So all of a sudden you have one, they have one. You're in a Mexican standoff, with your guns pointed at each other, like, hey, I want to move my Bitcoin. And they're like, hey, you're not going to move your Bitcoin, And so it is a reality that at least must be acknowledged. It's a possibility. Whether or not it's likely to happen, who knows? We don't necessarily think that's the case, but it could happen. And so, we just have to be honest with the potential risks and downsides of including counterparties into our custody setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Mexican stand up. That's never not going to make me laugh, because all I see in my head is the Spider-Man meme where it's like they're all like finger gun at the face or back and forth, whatever. Like, that's all I see in my head. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that you hit the nail on the head. It's like what is one of the fundamental memes in Bitcoin? Don't trust, verify. And how many times did you just say trust in like that whole thing, right? Like there is trust involved, and it's easy to say don't trust and verify, but frankly, our world runs on trust. At the end of the day, all of these fancy things that we built, it does come to trust, right? Even Bitcoin in and of itself. Okay, you would say, well, no, you just verify, you just got the blockchain, whatever. Well, you still got to trust that especially the economic nodes and all the miners, they're still all going to do the things that you want them to do or that we think they should do. Like that, there is still a layer of trust within this. Now, that trust in Bitcoin's case is backed by some really good game theory to say, yes, that trust will continue. But at the end of the day, like we can't truly remove trust. So, just say, well, you can't verify whatever, like it's dumb. But the premise is still the
Yeah.
same. Like, the more trust we introduce, the more we get back to why we have fiat money in the first place, right? That is literally why we went from hard money to fiat, is because, hey, we felt that it was better to trust people instead of just verify everything ourselves, right? And so that is, again, it gets back to that slippery slope I was just talking about. It's like, okay, well, the more trust we introduce, the more we're going back towards that other kind of way we did things. And sure, you could say that, it's different because it's on Bitcoin, so it's verifiable, blah, 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 all this and that. But humans are pretty good at mucking things up, especially over long periods of time. And I think we all have a pretty good feeling that if Bitcoin is here to stay, which it seems like it is, it's here to stay for quite a while. And so, this gets into a whole nother topic of conversation. I'm not going to go down as far as the ossification of Bitcoin, but neither here nor there. If you don't trust third parties, or you're not willing to trust third parties, then you ain't using collaborative custody, you ain't using multi-institution, you ain't using a custodian. And if you acquired your Bitcoin through a custodian, then you should probably be coin joining it or doing something else to get that KYC off of it. So at the end of the day, if that's what's most important, we can help you do that. And again, we can still act as an inheritance function within your plan, if need be. So yeah, it's, I think, to reiterate something you said multiple times already, this list isn't linear. So it's not like, okay, this one is a yes or no, so we go to this. This one's a yes or no, so we go to this. It's an entire list where we're just getting to know where your head's at, so we can help you set your custody up the best way that we can do it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. We're not saying don't trust people. We're not trying to say that. What we're really here to do is help you understand, make a truly educated decision around how you are going to secure your Bitcoin stack. And, you know, we're doing it from a holistic perspective again, and that's why we have these questions here. It's not just, yeah, you should have a multi-sig collaborative custody setup, I don't care what you say, we're removing single points of failure, whatever. What they all say. And man, it got really dark in here all of a sudden. But we're really looking at this also from your estate plan, also from, will you need this Bitcoin anytime soon? What do your heirs know or not know? Your spouse, what do they know, not know? We have the technical competence. I say we, I'm really saying Jacob, to be able to, okay, if you don't have it but you want it, we can educate you on that also. So we can help you just think through every single risk vector maybe that you need to be thinking about when it comes to taking custody of your Bitcoin or allowing someone else to be involved in the custody of your Bitcoin. So anything else you think would be good to add to that
No.
um,
The
before
last
we
thing I'll
wrap
say
up?
is if you're reading some of these crazy self custody things online, like, hey, you need to have 7 different CDs and an old laptop and all this crap in the name of security, like, just no. Like the Yeti Cold protocol, whatever these things are, like, just no. Like, don't do it. Is it in some respect more secure than trying to trust a hardware wallet, whatever? Sure. But the complexity that comes along with it, just, okay, more complex, the more faults you introduce at the end of the day. So unless you're like you're extremely technically minded, don't friggin' do it. So I think it's just good to say that because there is just some crazy custody things thrown around online that it's just like, no way in heck am I doing that.
Right. Um, yeah, I don't know who's thinking about doing that, but man, if they're watching this, then anyways, let's let's just give a rundown, maybe back through the 10 questions. So, just to recap, how much Bitcoin do you own? Again, one was really the threshold to where we're saying, yeah, we really need to get it off of an exchange. It's very important. Obviously, if you want to, you should, and you should consider still at any amount of Bitcoin, especially if you're going to continue to purchase it over time. You may be at half a Bitcoin right now, but you will be at one. You're DCAing in or whatever. So it's just go ahead. It's good to go ahead and get the security, taken care of, so that you know how it works, and you're not trying to do it once your stack is much bigger for the first time. And then, as we continue to go up, in stack size, like you said, it doesn't mean that you must go to collaborative or something else, but it's still, is something that you need to think about doing as you have more and more. And then there's also the estate planning considerations that come in if it's a really a large amount. Are you comfortable with self custody or willing to learn what is necessary to become comfortable? We're asking that again because if you're not willing to do it, you're not comfortable with holding the private keys on your possession in some way, then we need to think about some other options. And it's just good to know what your options are, even if that's the case. Of course, we encourage self custody, like we said, but if you're really against it, for whatever reason, and who knows, if it's your 90-year-old grandpa or something, then yeah, maybe we want to steer clear of that. We don't want to go down that path now. But anyways, we just want to understand if you're already comfortable and if you're willing to learn. If not, then there's still options to you that we believe are suitable, we'll say. And we also need to understand how well your spouse or heirs understand this stuff too. 3, how technically competent are you? And as you touched on, that can change how we go about things. 4, do you want anyone else to access or receive your Bitcoin if you become incapacitated or pass away? I don't know why anyone else would not want this. So it's going to be a consideration for everybody. It's just a matter of what solution solves, for this problem and does not hurt you in another area more than you would like, essentially. But you need to be thinking about this if you're not already. It doesn't matter how much you have, where you're at, how old you are. You need to be thinking about if you were hit by a bus tomorrow, you did not do all of this in vain. You did not save your wealth in Bitcoin for nothing. We ultimately want Bitcoin to be able to change our future, our family's future, and set us up, for financial freedom. I would say is the best phrase to describe that with. So make sure you're thinking about this. And then, as you mentioned and explained, while we were talking, it's not just a key possession solution that you need to find. And an inheritance protocol through somewhat, one of these providers that offers them may help with the facilitation of making sure your wife can at least access the keys. From there, who knows what's going to happen. But then there's also the legal title that must be transferred to your heirs, if you and your wife were to pass away. And if that legal title is not also transferred, well, then we're going to have this probate process. And, if you decide to do it kind of under the, in the shadows, maybe you just pass the keys, to your heirs without doing anything else. Your executor doesn't, reveal that you had it. Sure, if you want to go ahead and do that, go ahead. But now, again, you're opening your heirs up to potential litigation risks. If they cannot prove that they legally own this, and tax fraud risks. If it's not included in your estate when you do pass away, you could be found, for committing tax fraud. Because they go to, let's say, 10 years down the road, they go to buy a house or something, and they're buying it with Bitcoin. Well, somebody's probably going to ask questions if you're spending a significant amount of your stack, and then that's when just giving him the keys is going to be not the best option, we'll say. Mm-hmm. 5, what is your total net worth? Again, as we get higher net worths, the estate planning piece becomes even more important. And we're also thinking about, is this Bitcoin that you plan to benefit from or use in the future? If it's truly just generational, then we may consider, other forms of custody, the multi-institutional, like we spoke to. 6, do you have a unique public figure risk? This one's pretty straightforward. If people know you and they know you own at least some amount of Bitcoin, they will probably assume you own more than you actually do, which works against you. And so you want to make sure that you do not become a honeypot, to where someone knows that's where he lives, that's who he is. All I need to do is go after him and get his Bitcoin. And we say public figure. I think a lot of people may not think of themselves as public figures, but they really are. If you're well known in your community, like, you don't have to be the mayor of the town to be a public figure. You don't have to be JD Vance, like we said in our previous recording that didn't work out. But anyways, you don't have to be a politician or anything. You can be a celebrity even. You can be an athlete. You could be, whatever, to where somebody would know.
I hate this word, but you 7, can be an influencer too.
Oh, that's you. That's you, man. We're going to be an influencer. We are influencing people's financial decisions with their Bitcoin. Number 7, natural disaster risks. Point is, make sure you're taking the proper backup precautions for your seed phrase. And if you are in a place where you have potential, very extreme natural disasters, to where, you even if you have a safe and a steel plate, it could still be gone. You need to start to consider geographical distribution of your backups. 8, how important is privacy anonymity to you? As we touched on, anytime you're looping in a counterparty, you are therefore less private than you would be before. Whether or not that is important to you or not is up to you. But there are options for you if you want to remove a single point of failure, for example, and still not give up your privacy, anonymity. Most people don't fully realize that because, everyone wants to say, oh, you should just remove single points of failure. 100% get into our collaborative custody product. Number 9, do you regularly spend or transact with Bitcoin? Now it's pretty straightforward. 10, are you willing to trust a third party? Again, pretty straightforward after you hear us talk about it and why we even consider these things in the first place. But after going through the list, we just hope that this gives you a clearer understanding for everything that you need to be thinking about. And as long as you're thinking about all these things, you'll come to an intentional, educated decision that is good for you, good for your family, and good for your family's financial future at the end of the day. And so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment, ask, reach out to us. You can go to our website, strongwealth.net. We offer free discovery calls. So you can come in, share with us what's going on, and we'll be honest with you if we can help, or even if it makes sense to work together. But, we believe that we really are, sitting at I would say we're sitting in such a unique position, being financial planners and having the understanding of Bitcoin that we do. I was talking to the guy that I had a coffee with this morning, and he said, you guys are like probably the only ones in the world doing this stuff, aren't you? And I was like, well, I said, I prefer to stay humble, but there are other people that will do this to some extent. There's others out there, but I do think that we are one of, if not the best, at doing this, because we can go so deeply. I say we, it's again, really Jacob, can go so deeply into the weeds from a technical and privacy perspective that a lot of others in our similar position don't do or can't do. So, and that includes holding a key for clients. That's something that, no one else is doing at this point. So all that to say, we hope that this is helpful from a holistic perspective, and you heard something that is going to help you that you haven't heard before, and just help you set yourself up for success into the future. Anything to add on to that before
I think
we
the
wrap
only
it up?
last thing I'd add is this whole custody landscape is going to change across time. And that's one more reason why you need somebody in your court that's going to help you change as it changes. Because Bitcoin, as we know, is
Yeah.
still a nascent asset. And how we hold this thing and how we use it, there's no way it's not going to change into the future. Will the fundamentals be the same? Sure. But there's going to be way more opportunity to get way more creative with this stuff, whether it's a TSS setup where, hey, you still have one key, but you have it in 3 shards, and it's effectively a multi-sig, but the on-chain imprint is only single sig. Whether it's layered keys where you've got time locks on multiple different keys, and actually after those time locks, Bitcoin gets distributed into new wallets based on those keys. And so we can, in effect, really facilitate custody or possession on that time. There's things that are coming down the pipe even now that are cool, and certainly there's things that are, we're not even aware of. They're going to change that. So we're on top of them, and we'll continue to be on top of them.
That's right. Awesome. Maybe one thing I'll add on to here: you don't have to pay a percentage fee for collaborative multi-sig. There are some people out there charging a percentage fee. We don't agree with that fully. We understand why it's done, but you don't have to if you're in that. And I just want you to know there's other options out there that can prevent you from, your fees from scaling along with your Bitcoin wealth. So, all right. Well, that's where we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. We'll again dive into these more specific things in the future, maybe, the specific hardware wallets that we recommend. I know you mentioned it briefly, why we do that. We can go deeper into that. We can go deeper into the estate planning piece of Bitcoin and why it's very critical for people to be thinking about. But just tune in to future videos, because we're going to make sure that we're going into the weeds, offering tactical advice that is truly going to help change your life day to day, rather than some moon boy math price predictions that get you excited but leave you with a dopamine hangover 30 minutes later. So, all right. I am officially done there. We'll talk to you soon.